Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight. My name is David Gifford. I'm going to be hosting this presentation on mobile technology and social change for the New York Technology Council. The New York Technology Council has a number of sponsors for 2012, and we encourage those of you that are associated with organizations that might be interested in supporting the efforts of the council and the ability for the council to gain the ear a little bit of some of New York state government and local government, and to put a lot of different technology topics in front of the technology community in New York City to think about sponsorship here. You can see some of the names here that are working here in 2012. We wanted to extend a very, very special thanks to Microsoft. Obviously, they gave us a really great space to work in. I don't think I've ever had one of these neat monitors that lets you see what's going on behind you, so I don't have to look like this the entire time. So thank you to Microsoft, and also for providing one of our speakers tonight as well. So we appreciate that. First line of my presentation got knocked off there. What it's supposed to say there is mobile plus social, and obviously that's the topic of tonight's panel discussion. We're very fortunate to have a very diverse group of people here. One of the things I noticed when I first started talking to Don about structuring some events around mobile technology and how it's changing our lives and the opportunities that we have and the information that we need in order to do good strategy around mobile technology, was that many of the things that we think about are very technical in nature. One of the things that I hear a lot when I tell people that I do a little bit of mobile development or that I do mobile strategy is they ask immediately, what app are you developing? Sort of an appification. This seems to be the central focus for a lot of people about what mobile phones mean. It does not mean that. It's very exciting right now in the United States and in the developed worlds what's possible with smartphones, how quickly those technologies are advancing. But it's not the whole story. And even for myself, when I started to put this track together, I came across a couple of unexpected things. For me, who is involved actually in writing an app, as I started to look around the environment to create kind of a context for myself for understanding who would be good speakers and what might be an interesting thing to learn about mobile technology and social change, I got excited immediately because the news in 2011 and going into 2012 has a lot to do with the way that mobile technology is changing things, right? I mean, one of the biggest news stories of the year, obviously, was about what people referred to as the Arab Spring, right, in international politics. We're hearing from the financial markets about the growth of banking and financial transactions that take place in the third world and how that's benefiting people. Things about microfinance loans, things like that. What's happening domestically, politically, the way that political fundraising is being done in the United States, the enormous grassroots or hopefully grassroots policy groups that have arisen, the Occupy movement, the Tea Parties, how they're doing their organizing, the way that they're doing their fundraising. All these things are related to mobile technology. Somehow you hear about them in the context of the stories. And the scale of what's happening with these things struck me as being larger than what's happening with the scale of individual app development or that as a single strategy, even inside of corporate organizations. I come from a marketing and advertising background in technology over the past couple of years, and it seemed to me that one of the things that we often discussed was how little effect some of the mobile strategies that we were trying out seemed to have. In this other context, looking at what's happening around the world, looking at what's happening in terms of civic empowerment, the changes that mobile technology is bringing to places outside of the United States, it was extraordinary. It was very unexpected to me. And so I wanted to share some different perspectives about mobile technology that come from looking at what happens inside of these different things. We would like to find a couple of really great people. Peter Laudati is a Microsoft technology and development evangelist. He's going to be talking to us a little bit about the technology perspective. What are some of the platforms that inform social plus mobile on the phone? What opportunities do those things provide? I'm also really pleased that my good friend Michelle Fanzo, who is a foreign policy consultant, has worked in the past for the United Nations in field work, is going to be talking to us from a point of view of providing some examples about what kinds of projects are out there. What are some of the success stories out there? How are they being measured from a policy perspective? What are good projects? What are bad projects? For me, these are very objective looks at what's happening with mobile technology as far as it relates to the way it integrates to our society, the way it changes our society. The next two speakers, J.D. Hollis and Daniel Latorre, come from a very different perspective, I think, than that, looking more from how does technology affect us? Some of the more contextual elements that surround the way that we choose technology, the way that technology chooses us, how it changes the way that we do the things, the way that we relate to one another socially. And I think you'll also find with them that there are a number of very surprising viewpoints when you start looking away from what's an app on the phone, what can my smartphone do. So I'm an analytical type of person, so I started right here, which is what are the numbers about? This number was extraordinarily surprising to me, right? 6 billion mobile cellular connections. I'm just going to read a bit from the slide, which is 5.9 billion mobile cellular subscriptions, global penetration reaching 87% of the population of the world, and 79% of the people in the developing world. You can see from the diagram there that there is a big difference between being connected and on the internet, on a smartphone, or having the infrastructure, for instance, of an iTunes store or an Android store or something like that, and being connected simply to other people by a voice network and an SMS network. Huge difference. Those numbers are changing all the time, but to me, the fact is that more than a simple majority of the entire globe are connected by mobile technology. A third of the entire population of the world, getting close to 8 billion people, is online, has access to the internet. You can see the increase from 2006 to 2011. You can also see the increase of access to that's happening inside of the developed world. And one of the reasons that it's interesting to look at what's going on inside of the developed world, I think, from a strategist's point of view, for a person who's searching for insights point of view, is what do people that have few options do when they're passionate about things with the technology that's given to them? So this is one of these elements that I looked at in this sort of treasure hunt that I'm doing for insights about what can I bring to the mobile technology work that I'm doing from this group. This is available from the ITU and was just published in October of 2011. So these numbers are pretty current, and I think they're pretty amazing. This is the amount of mobile broadband that's out there. I think one of the first things that you learn when you start looking at what's happening outside of the domestic United States or the developed countries of Europe and so forth is that mobile broadband has a significantly greater reach inside of developing worlds than broadband access via the wire. So it's not great broadband, but one of these things that this is showing us, and Peter might talk to this a little bit, is about what can we look forward to. Some of the examples that we might show you tonight from the developing countries have a lot to do with doing quite a great deal with a very limited amount of bandwidth. But one of the things that the previous slide and this slide is showing you is that that's changing also. Not only are people having access to telephones, there's going to be more and more access to data in a bigger and bigger pipe. All of that said, everything's still an experiment. This is true domestically, I find, in working with clients, that what's happening in mobile technology is confusing. It's not as if we can directly apply the things that we learned even during the great rush of the internet bubble to how to do the right thing on mobile. Everything's a bit of an experiment. Everything is a different tool set. Another one of these insights that I've kind of stumbled across in my little treasure hunt here is the idea that the mobile device, by being slightly restrictive and for lots of other reasons, it's a very different animal than the desktop computer or ordinary computing platforms. And I think that if you look at some of the examples of what's happening out there, I think JD probably will have some examples for you about some surprising things that you find when you look around for technology. Mobile means something different than just a smaller screen or just a smaller connected device. So this is Maura O'Neill, who was speaking at a conference, I think it was last month, and she works for the USAID. 5 billion cell phones in and of themselves are not going to produce development. She goes on to talk about, essentially, we're all trying things differently. There's going to be a lot of failures out there. Some of the projects that we'll probably show you tonight have very limited applicability. Some of them have interest because they're just sort of interesting at the get-go. They don't really have legs. So that's going to change. The numbers are too big. So I came across mobile technology inside of a social context and a social policy context like a lot of Americans did during the period of the Haiti earthquake and the amazing amount of work that was done to raise funds for disaster relief in Haiti. So that brought an idea of mobile involvement to a whole new level of awareness. And those are the numbers about how much money was donated to the disaster relief fund via SMS, right, by telephone. This activated a lot of repeat donors. This was a surprising fact to me, that a lot of people that gave money to Haiti were people who were not particularly different from regular folks in terms of their giving, who activated and became more aware of some social issues and what they could do about it because of what their experience texting funds into the Haiti disaster relief. So one of the things that was discovered about why this became kind of a viral thing and how things improved was that the aspect of giving became a very social network related thing, but not through technology necessarily. The phone was an adjunct to the way that we talked about giving inside of a social context, which is more of a face-to-face activity. But there's more than that went on in Haiti. Haiti became a little bit of a laboratory for some things that are related to mobile technology use and social change. So more than just aid. First thing, the mobile network technically was the first thing that was available. It was before the water was back online, before electricity in general was back online, before landlines were back online. Another aspect of mobile inside of this particular crisis was only 35% of the Haiti population carried a cell phone. A lot of that skewed towards a younger demographic. But mobiles, by their nature, are shared devices. So these mobile devices traveled with groups of people. Younger people had cell phones. They were with their grandparents. They were with their younger siblings. They were with their parents. So information that was shared via mobile and the advantages that people had through mobile technology, they were able to share with a larger audience than that. And that's a little bit unique. It's very different than what a desktop or a television offers us. So mobile technology in concert with some of the social networking sites such as Facebook and Twitter enabled the ramp up of translators globally in order to process the information that was coming through the cell phones and the text messages and so forth that were happening. There was an enormous amount of data that was being logged. There was an enormous amount of data being geotagged. This targeted search and rescue requests. So this is different than just money being donated to Haiti. Emergency information services about which hospital to go to and how to take care of yourself and how to boil water and so forth were distributed through mobile technology. This all happened within about a week and a half. One of the things that I thought was interesting was the enormous amount of data visualization that was available, and I didn't know that that was an important thing until I came across this particular project. What this was the ability for aid workers to understand the movement of the population after the earthquake, and it was important, I didn't know this, it was important in order to stop a full-scale cholera epidemic, to understand how the population was moving. This data was generated by scanning the cell towers and getting information from the SIMs and the phones about how the population moved in and outside of the various cities in Haiti. It's a little odd. I mean, I looked at it, I also thought, well, it's kind of invasive too, but I mean, that's another topic we're going to talk about here with mobile technology, the advantages here, and some of the disadvantages that come along with it. So 630,000 people's movements are estimated inside of 12 hours. So the government of Haiti did not act on this particular data. They used a more manual process themselves. And what these two slides show is that more manual process, which was a standard, I guess, of some kind that the aid workers were able to rely upon, it's not as accurate as what they were able to do with the cell phones. There was a follow-up study done on foot by UN folks that have done this sort of work in the past that do a much more in-depth interview process, and they really determine what the population movement was like. It corresponds almost exactly with the information that was developed and was available inside of 12 hours from the use of mobile technology. So mobile technology is sort of a feedback network, right? A sensor network. So disaster relief, social programs that are about big countries like the U.S. giving money or delivering aid and delivering technology, those are one thing. There are other kinds of social things that are happening the embedding of technology inside of developing populations, for instance, is a big story about this. This M-Pesa system, which is deployed in Kenya, it was a very big story. And one of the reasons it's such a big story is because of the enormous amount of uptake that we'll take a look at here. And what this project does basically is it allows people that don't have bank accounts and don't have very much money, essentially are unbanked, are unbankable, to do things like pay people, to save money in an account, to get money from an agent, to get money from overseas in very small amounts, 20 cents, 40 cents, 60 cents, things like that. There are lots of problems with it. This is a commercial project. This is a for-profit project. It was launched in 2007. In 2011, 13.8 million subscribers in Kenya. More than a third of the entire Kenyan population have accounts with M-Pesa. Developed by Vodafone, giant European company, right? That sees a profit value in actually doing this kind of work. $139 million in annual revenue. I don't know exactly what the profit was because it's embedded in their annual report with some other numbers and so forth, but it is profitable. This is the adoption curve for M-Pesa. It's gigantic. It's an extraordinary adoption rate. M-Pesa is interesting. There are a number of aspects to it, some of which are about how money agents are determined and so forth, but largely the technology itself doesn't exist on a desktop anywhere. It doesn't exist on a large-scale piece of hardware. It's all phones, and it's all almost entirely, not SMS, but a variation of that, which is just done on very simple dumb phones. So for me, tonight, I'm imagining, if I can be have sort of an empathy with you folks, that you are coming to this a little bit from the outside like I was. So my essential question was, when I started to approach this topic was, what is it that engages? Right? There was a study done that analyzed what happens with M-Pesa. And M-Pesa has its problems as well. A lot of people think of M-Pesa as a way of eradicating poverty. It's not that. It doesn't get down to the very bottom of the social pyramid. There's some other concerns about it too. Is it exploitive? Does it lock in people to a particular company and so forth? There are a number of negative aspects to it as well. But definitely the story of engagement that's there is extraordinary. You know, if I'm even thinking in my most cynical terms, a developer in the United States, I want to look at adoption rates like that. Why is that mobile experience so compelling? Right? So there was a study done that kind of analyzed these questions about why was it so extraordinarily rapidly adopted. One of those things was this acceptance that mobile technology, as you probably kind of assumed from looking around you, uses early adopters who get excited about topics, who push the envelope with new things, to become a route for others to see it. As we discussed before, the mobile device by its nature is a shared device, and it's used amongst the group, and it's used outdoors. So there's a requirement that the technology be handled as an extension of existing social structures. And they meet specific social and practical needs, more so than narrowly targeted, for instance, web-based projects. Mobile devices are handled in the social context, and so they need to be an extension of what people are already doing inside of that social context. There needs to be an understanding that people are trying to accomplish things, even more so, I think, than just basic user-centered kind of awareness. This is an interesting story about how people who were so poor that they can't even own these tiny Nokia devices that are practically given away, they created their own network of friends to borrow from. I can use your phone, I can share it, I can change it around. It reinforces yet again this idea of sharing, that mobile technology itself is embedded in the way that that community itself shares and exchanges. So this is just a quickie, 2 or 3 minutes here about one or two more simple projects that I thought we could play for you.
The developing countries in Africa, a telephone, or in Kenya specifically, a telephone is not a telephone. It is a lifeline. It's more than just a communication tool. It's your bank. In the rural areas, this is your bank. This is how you send your money. This is how you send your school fees, how you pay your power bill, how you pay whatever. So the more value we attach to the mobile phone, the higher uptake. And I think that's actually one of the reasons we've got such tremendous uptake of mobile telephony in the country. I operate a company called Green Dreams Limited, which is helping the small-scale farmers in Kenya bring their organic produce to the market. I also innovated a mobile application called iCow, which won the first Apps for Africa competition. The beauty of it is it's voiced prompt backs. And because it's voice, we're able to do it now in a variety of different languages. So we are customizing it to the languages of our farming communities in Kenya.
I'm a farmer in Kinangop. I grow snow peas, cabbages for market, and then we have maize for domestic use. I was introduced by MFarm by somebody by Jamira.
MFarm is an application for farmers where the farmers can socialize with each other. They can be connected. So the main aim of MFarm is connecting farmers with each other so that they can empower themselves with information.
We talk through the phone, MFarm, to help the farmers that they can get the ready market.
The procedure to get the information, it is just by texting message. You consult about the price, then you get the feedback.
To me, it's the logical progression of going from a text-based system to web-based, but recognizing that the majority of the people can't actually access it because then they're not connected to the net by hardware or devices that allow them to have a lot of text or a lot of pictures, etc. But we're then going to where that is all amalgamated, as in a site where we've got all that information, and bringing it down into voice, onto a phone, and onto the most basic phones.
What's really important is that the web should be a participative thing, that everybody should be involved in it, not just involved in watching it like a TV, but they should be involved in creating it. So if you can read a blog, then you should have the ability to blog. This maybe is one of the ways of getting more content in different languages. If you look at the moment on the web, the stuff you'll find out there is very much more in a few languages, such as English and Chinese, and not so much in the dialects or in India or in Africa, for example. So how can we get people to create local content in their own language?
Tim Berners-Lee, awesome. So there's a longer video that's out there, and I'm going to put this deck out to share, I guess, on the New York Technology site. So most of the slides and so forth here are credited so that you can look up the source material for yourself. In the video, this is iCow, iCow.co.ke. You want to go find out more about iCow. And what a number of awards. It's gotten about $20,000 in funding last time I took a look. MFarm is already generating real-time information. That's the price of avocados 2 days ago. So, a lot going on, right? Disaster and humanitarian relief, livelihoods and economic development. I should note I got this list from mobileactive.org. It's a great website, just a broad overview about what's happening socially. Political advocacy and human rights advocacy, citizen media, democratic participation, education, environment, health, enormous work going on, helping to people that don't normally get access to decent health care to get information that they need. So with all that going on, in looking at all these different examples, there's a lot that we can learn about what engagement means. I don't know whether that means that you would like to do things that change the world, or whether you want to learn more about engagement for understanding how to make what you do more understandable and accessible to people. So we're going to approach things from a couple different points of view. We're not going to talk about apps. We're not going to talk about the things that I think you maybe have used to been hearing. We're going to learn about things, first from a more objective point of view, examining things from a social context. That's what Michelle's going to bring to us, as sort of a foreign policy approach to what's out there, what's working, what doesn't work, some examples. Peter's going to have us take a look a little bit more about what are some of the technology things that are providing a platform for us. What are some of the things that are coming up in the future? In particular, take a look at some of the things that Microsoft is doing with cloud technology in Windows Phone. And for the other two gentlemen there who are approaching things from a more design-oriented perspective, but also from a technology background, it's this idea of developing a holistic view about what mobile is, because mobile technology, I believe, is very integrated with the way that we interact with it. There's more of it around us than there is the just computers standing alone like we're used to interacting with. We have mobile technology with us more often, and the way that we use mobile technology as a filter, as a way of getting information and so forth, is shaping the way that we look at things. So I think of this as kind of collecting a number of insights. This is just stuff that I've kind of come across and was brainstorming about as I looked at some of these examples. Mobile's where the action is, rather than preceding it. I often think of, we often look at our desktop computers before we act. We often look at our phones after we're already in the realm of action. They provide a sensor network for us, like we saw from the Haiti example. Massive, massive, massive deployment. The numbers are staggering. 85% of the world. Low cost. Development and trying things out is much cheaper on mobile. This is something I think is extraordinary, particularly for the developing world. The difference between having that tiny Nokia phone, which is cost almost nothing, and not having any network device. Think about what a quantum change that is. Mobile is interstitial. It fits into all the other things that we're doing. So it opens up a larger window of opportunity for people to be engaged over a network. It's localized. I'll have question marks. I invite you to collect insights as you hear these different perspectives on mobile technology. The last point I was going to leave you with was that it's not just about the developing world. This is an example of the store, Tesco, tried this out. The idea of bringing, using mobile to mash together our environment, right? They built the store by basically putting up a lighted poster, right? So these are people that are very busy in their lives. They're going back and forth to work. They're engaged with one another, and they can get the act of shopping done inside of their subway. That's what that is a subway car that man is entering. So you do your shopping as you're waiting on your commute. It's everywhere. It's all places, and it's kind of fun to go looking for it. So that's my stuff. I'm going to invite Michelle to start things up. I'm going to start her PowerPoint here. So collect questions. We're going to have a little bit of a Q&A at the end of the session. I invite you to think about those questions while the presenters are at work.
Thanks, David. That was great. And I spent some time this morning wondering if I should put in my Haiti example, and I'm really glad I didn't, because you've covered that really, really well. My presentation tonight is a good follow-on to what you just saw. And what I'd like to say is I'm going to give you an overview from my point of view of working internationally, sometimes at a very high policy level, but also sometimes very much at a grassroots level. I kind of bounce back and forth between the two. So I've peppered my presentation tonight with a lot of examples, some that will seem similar to Dave's and some that are different, just to try to give you a sense of the breadth of the way that mobile technology is being used. But don't think that it's totally comprehensive. There are many, many other applications in the developing world. And then I'm going to raise a few questions about what seems to be working well, where some of the big questions still are, and the challenges towards the end. And then in the Q&A, of course, people can revisit any of these and we can go into more depth. Okay. In the broadest sense, I would say that mobile technology is most often used within a development or humanitarian context in emergencies and disasters. You've just seen an example. Health, particularly health data, and in the broad sense, in international development. And when I get into examples of each of these, I can break down a little bit more what I mean by international development, because it's a huge topic. So the only slide I have on Haiti, and I'm really glad I didn't go into more depth, is something different maybe than, or something more in depth than what Dave had said. I was particularly impressed when I did my research on Haiti after the fact, what worked, what didn't. One of the biggest problems that Haiti really, because of the extreme environment and the extreme emergencies that were there, it really highlighted one of the greatest challenges in doing any kind of relief work is the coordination of the actors, right? Everybody shows up, for the most part, with incredibly good intentions and runs around trying to help. But if you're not talking to each other, and in the case of Haiti, within 3 days you had over, I think it was over 450 NGOs that arrived on top of people that were already there. And they're not just from the US. People came from Israel. People came from locally, from South America. One of the fastest people to arrive actually was China, which nobody really talked about. But they were there doing infrastructure work. And the first medical people on site were actually from Israel. So people came from everywhere, but they hadn't talked to each other before they got there. So it was kind of like JFK on steroids, right? They had one airport. You probably remember the problems with the airport. They didn't have the ability to land all the planes. So some of them got rerouted to other places. So that the question of how do we prepare for what we don't know about? And what are the type of tools that you might need for that? And what really came out of reviewing that experience were some of the most useful tools were mobile technology. And one of the first ones that were up and running, it was up and running in 2 days, was called Usha Hadidi, which was first used in 2007, 2008 in Kenya. It's actually a company as well as a platform. And it's really using crowdsourcing technology through text messages. And what they built from these text messages were mapping of, particularly in the case of Haiti, where were the medical infrastructure and how to get people moving in the right direction. Because many people, it was so chaotic and all the streets were so clogged, nobody even knew how to get to things that they used to know where they were. So this was very helpful. It happens to be developed in Kenya. One of the second things up and running was actually a Sri Lankan collaboration tool called Sahana, and also particularly worked on the coordination problem and mapping about where were the NGOs working, where was the UN's capability, what did people have, such as did you have medical supplies but you had no doctors, or did you have doctors, which was often the case with no medical supplies. This also in real time trying to put together where were the tools you needed and where were the people you needed and how could you mobilize them. Health is another area where I see a lot of, in the developing world, health data and capturing health data and sharing health data where appropriate has become quite an innovation. Here's just one example, I could give you many, in South Africa dealing with the AIDS crisis. Health assistants are deployed into districts, and they usually see about 15 to 25 patients. They collect data and questions from the patients using their phone. They upload the information to a central area, and people in the central area can get back to them with feedback on questions. They can analyze and collect their data over time and see trends or patterns or concerns about the patient. But on top of it being individually useful to a patient, you can actually start to collect data by district and region to really see where do I need to do more preventative action? Where does there seem to be greater cases, of HIV? Where do I not have enough people deployed because there's such great demand? And these were things that in the old way of just going house to house, they weren't able to see the trends in the same way. International development, one of the main things beyond disaster response is conflict prevention and management, getting out ahead of the problem. And this is one of the things I really love about the use of mobile tech in my industry, is more and more people are starting to think proactively rather than reactively. Just two quick examples. One, again, was actually, I think they're both in Kenya. One was civil unrest during election times. This isn't just a Kenyan problem, this happens all over the world. And actually predicting and in real time collecting data on where things are starting to boil over, where there are current problems. They actually were able to take local, what they called peace councils, and deploy them using mediation techniques and negotiating techniques to try to diffuse what could have become violent conflict in a number of situations and didn't. And then one of my favorite, human-wildlife conflict. I spend some time upstate, and I understand this because I have a lot of deer that eat my vegetables and my flowers, which is a very minor version of what happens in other parts of the world where you have small farms and big animals. And it becomes quite an issue because the small farm is feeding a number of people, and the big animal may want to walk through or may want to eat the food. And it creates enough problem that we have farmers who die and we have elephants who get killed. And using technology where the elephants are tagged and monitored where they go, automatically information is uploaded on where they are, again, through text messages into a common system, park rangers and preservation people can go out and help steer the animals away from the local farms. And there were more than 3,000 incidents of farmer on elephant conflict a couple years ago in Kenya. So this is no small thing. I'm going to give you some quick examples. You can kind of read through my little case studies here. But this is a very typical example of disaster risk management. Again, trying to prevent or mitigate something before it becomes a full-blown disaster. Many countries, Panama is a good example, but many countries are in disaster zones. I mean, if you read the situation in Panama, it just sounds like a disaster waiting to happen. They're in a zone for so many different natural challenges. And many of the people in Panama live in areas, particularly close to water, where these disasters often happen. So what's needed? After looking at Haiti and the tsunami and the Cyclone Nargis in Myanmar, a lot of countries started to say, wow, I don't want to be the next. How do I help prevent this? So they realized that they need early warning systems. But they're very expensive. Some of them seem very expensive until the use of mobile technology came in. How can we use mobile technology? One of the simplest things they used in Panama, because they had a lot of problems with flooding, was starting with the upstream communities and training them how to send messages using text messages on phones to the downstream communities. And it sounds incredibly simple. And while they were training the people, should a flood come and you see it coming, these are the people you call. And you also call the radio station so they can send out the message. While they were training them, a flood happened. And before everybody was trained, they suddenly had to use the system, or they wanted to use the system, and it worked. I mean, it was one of the best kind of examples of learn by doing. But the people themselves were so, after the disaster, were so empowered that they had actually been able to prevent this from becoming a tragedy downstream to their neighbors. I think that was, on top of it just being a good idea, it's also incredibly empowering for people to realize that they can take some control over things that often seem very fatalistic and very difficult to deal with. Another example of a reasonably common problem, food security, meaning the lack of food. Right now in the northwest of Africa, there's a huge drought problem. And one of the reasons there's a huge drought problem is because this has been going on for years. And the desert, the Sahara in some places, keeps encroaching on the arable land. So the actual space in which you can grow food gets smaller. Plus it's not raining, so places where you could grow food, you can't grow food. And there's many other problems of the land becoming too dusty and the animals moving away. So the outcome is that they have to import a lot more food than they used to. And if you're poor, imported food costs more than your locally grown food or the food that you could grow in your own garden. So more and more people are finding it out of their reach to buy the basics for their families. So what do you do about this? And I gave you some statistics of what's happening in Liberia. 41% of the people don't have enough food, 42% are malnourished, 2/3 of the food is imported. I mean, you can see where this is going. So the government, working with the UN, put together an early warning system for the food situation. Rather than wait until people were malnourished, were anemic, were approaching violence to steal food to feed their kids, if they could see this coming better, they could target the humanitarian interventions of what kind of food is needed, where is it needed, rather than wait until the last minute and often have to spend very high prices as well to get the food in when it's more of a panic situation. This is a personal example. I used to work in Afghanistan, and I wanted to give you an example of something that did not work so well. I was working in a rural area, and there were many problems. Let's just say there was like problems upon problems. But one of the biggest problems in the rural areas is that people don't have access to health care in general. Sometimes doctors come through or nurses come through. But particularly if you need to see somebody quickly, it's really hard. Most people walk or they ride, a donkey. It's hard to find cars. And one of the things I was realizing is the most vulnerable in those areas was often the pregnant women, because there were a lot of problems with childbirth, and the children that were under 5, because they're most vulnerable. They were very frail. There were a lot of respiratory illnesses in that country. And so these groups really needed to have some kind of capacity to be seen by a doctor. And so the NGO that I was running with my staff, we thought, well, this is great. It's a transport problem, right? It's not a health problem. It's a transport problem, so we can solve that. And we devised this system with a guy who was a taxi driver and a mobile phone, a couple mobile phones. And he was going to play the role, basically, of the emergency, ambulance and bring people to the hospital. And we were quite thrilled with ourselves that we'd gotten a couple of phones donated by Afghan Telecom because they thought it was a good idea. And we'd gone to the village elders, and we kind of made sure everybody understood how to use the phone. And we thought, this is great. It's a low-cost deal, and if it works really well, we're going to spin it out across the country. It's such a good idea. And it didn't work. And the reason it didn't work was there was a lot of focused on the immediate problem in front of us without realizing that what was really wrong was a systemic problem. And a systemic problem has many links in the chain. And while we had thought we'd closed a gap on one of the links, we also hadn't thought about that we'd given people phones who don't have phones. And they have many issues, right? So they often use the phone for other things than calling an emergency cab, because you don't need to call an emergency cab that often. But you might need to call your cousin, or you might need to call, somebody else. And so the phone would run out of power. The phone, you use phone cards in these countries. The phone card would get used up. And when we would go back and visit and make sure the phone was working, it would often be out of charge, or they didn't have the capacity because they couldn't get a phone card because the guy that comes through that sells the phone cards hadn't been there for who knows why. And we thought, okay, so we have to think about this a little more. And then what we found out also is at one point it worked and the cab came and it took the woman to the hospital, and there was nobody at the hospital. It was a regional hospital, and it was a holiday, and everybody had gone home, which when you live in the West, it doesn't occur to you that the hospital would be closed. But the hospital was closed, and so she sat outside for an entire day waiting for them to open while she was basically in labor. So I thought, was that a really effective intervention? So what I'm just explaining to you is that while a lot of these things sound great, when you really get down to the nitty-gritty level of making it happen, you start bumping up against the reality of life, right? That we're all human, that people will use the phone if you leave it with them, that the guy with the car went off on vacation and didn't tell anybody. These are just things that happen, and you have to think through contingency planning as well. So just in a very broad sense, some of the trends that I see, how is mobile technology used? It's still most used for voiced and text messaging, but more and more I'm seeing mapping, and mapping is incredibly useful. Data mapping is incredibly useful. Analysis of data, taking inventories, photos, videos, particularly video and photos when it comes to human rights abuses, and documenting them. Multimedia messaging. Some of the benefits, and there are many, real-time responses, real-time data, producing access to information where there wasn't any, affordability, as Dave brought out, opens up a lot of opportunity for people that never had this before, accountability, transparency, and public participation, which, as I mentioned, is a great empowerment tool for people who have felt disenfranchised and unempowered. Some of the shortcomings, the Afghan story gives you an example. One of the big ones is you can facilitate change with all this information and technology and opportunity, but change to what? If you don't help people envision a future, now they have more information, but maybe not the outcome they anticipated or not the outcome they wanted. So it's an ongoing process. Empowering people with information is great, but actually developing something that's sustainable and is lasting is a much bigger process. One of the biggest other problems I've seen is the need to standardize reporting. When you aggregate data coming in on phones, it's not all the same, and particularly when it comes in from field organizations and you put them together, they don't fit. It's apples and oranges. And so it sounds like it's a great system to centralize data, but there's a whole other level of actually getting the same type of data and the same type of reporting. Policies for sharing data. A lot of countries, I used to work in Myanmar, sharing information was not a good thing from their point of view. And then there's the sustainability, the training, and just even though it's lower cost, it's still a cost issue. So in closing, some of the things I'd like to leave with you, sharing knowledge, the old thing, knowledge is power. Now I think it's sharing knowledge is power. And we've seen that in some of the more political and social movements using mobile technology in recent months. Some of the questions is still who's paying Who's benefiting? Who's owning the information? Is someone controlling the data? Can you interject a lot of false data into some of these systems and skew the outcome? And I wanted to leave you with just a very, very current example of something. I don't know how many of you are familiar with bar camps. I actually learned about this a few months ago, and it's a technology process where you can bring people together in a room like this, and you can all be connected on your phones and your computers, or you can be in different rooms or to some degree in different places. And I'm not describing this as well as I could, but the biggest bar camp of people to ever come together in the world was yesterday in Burma. 5,000 Burmese, mainly young, came together and talked about mostly technology and how to use it. So there's a real example of a country that is just starting to open up, not sure where it's going, but clearly the little bit of freedom they've gotten, they're really taking it to try to teach themselves what it means and what they can do with it. And that's the end of my presentation. Thanks.
Peter, you want to get yourself connected there? For those of you that are thinking about questions, it's helpful if you maybe write down the name of the person that you might want to ask that question of, so that we can get your questions answered by the people that approached them. I love elephant tweets. That's just like awesome. So Peter's going to give us a quick look at some of the technology factors that, in particular, some of the Microsoft products are able to provide, and how that might shape the way that mobile engages with folks. I know that I was kind of eager to learn more about what the Windows Phone operating system has done, because one of the philosophical things that I had heard about it as it was being developed was a very conscious awareness of social notification, social participation being a part and parcel of the design philosophy of the operating system. I don't want to take too much away from it.
So hello, and thank you everyone for having me here this evening. As David said, my name is Peter Laudati, and I'm with Microsoft's Technology Evangelism organization. Some of you may recognize me if you're participating in the Microsoft community. I help act as a liaison for many of the community groups that meet to learn about technology here in this facility and others throughout the tri-state area. You can follow me online at myname.com. I have a blog up there where I post about technology community events that go on all the time. And I guess I'll change the direction of the conversation for a little bit here to be more technology oriented. We heard some great stories from Michelle and David. The bar camp thing was kind of interesting. So I actually am one of the main organizers of the New York bar camp.
Oh, you really?
We've been having them since 2006-ish going on.
Yeah.
Nowhere's near that big. Maybe we have about 200 people here, and we've done it here in this facility. We've done it at NYU. We've done it at other places around. But it's a great opportunity where we actually do it for the weekend, and a bunch of folks come out from the startup community, from technology, from the business community, and it's like one giant brainstorming session. Mm-hmm. It's all ad hoc. It's all open space as an event format. So people just draw on a whiteboard what they want to talk about and break off and go in different rooms, and it's wonderful. So 5,000 people. I've actually been curious how they did that scale-wise, but it's pretty interesting. So a lot of the stories we heard earlier about what mobile does, or the types of problems it's solved around the world, are just inspiring. I mean, think about a lot of the technology that's going on. To us, that isn't probably that new. Just basic the things you can accomplish with text messaging, which has been around for years. Forget about what smartphones and iPhones and things do today. That's compelling. I have a story that I'll start off with, and I think it's much more of a first world problem than a third world problem like that, or a developing world issue. I participated in a lot of events in the startup community, where I do see people doing application development on the different smartphone platforms. And my overall sense when I look around the room and I see all the ideas, there's brilliant ideas coming out, but they are very first world oriented. And maybe that's something that over time that will expand to benefit everyone in ways that are unexpected. This is my first world problem. So this is a really simple one. How many folks here are not from Manhattan? Okay. So how many folks are from New Jersey or Long Island? Not too many. Okay. guess they didn't let anyone in except for me. So I'm from New Jersey, and I love New York City. I love coming here, but I don't live here. It'd be great if I could, but I don't. So a lot of times when I come here, I'm working in the evening for events like this, or I come in to hang out with friends socially, and we go out to the restaurants and things like that. But at the end of the night, most people who come from New Jersey don't drive a car here because that would be insane. We're dependent on the train or a bus or some sort of mass transit. And so we often have to make our way over here to Penn Station to go home at the end of the night. And there's a little problem. After 7 p.m., it doesn't look like this anymore. There's no people there, and it gets empty, and you don't know if you're going to miss your train. The trains don't run as frequently. So, and if it's after, I think, 12, 1 o'clock, basically you might miss the last train, and then you're stuck, sitting on the platform in Penn Station, and that's not too fun. It could be empty like that. And I sort of call that the Cinderella dilemma, because you'd be sitting at Penn Station hanging out with the mice and the other creatures that are there in the middle of the night. And, what I find is when you're hanging out with friends or doing whatever it is you're doing in the city, it ruins your night, because the whole time this is hanging over your head like, is it midnight yet? Is the clock ticking? When's the next train? Oh, did I just miss it? Now I got to wait there an hour. And about 5 years ago, I wrote an article on my blog about this, saying I wish there was a way that I could just look down and know when the next train is coming. Like, how simple would this be? This is pre-iPhone, pre-smartphone. That would be a foreign concept. And New Jersey Transit has a website. You can go on your browser and look up the schedule. This was like 2006-ish. But, you couldn't get that on your phone. I mean, and even then there were phones with some browsers, but it just wouldn't work. And at the time, they actually put out a special mobile site that worked in basic browsers that would just give you the schedule. And I thought, this is eureka. This is great. I mean, now I don't have to worry about it anymore. If I just look down and say, oh, yeah, okay, let's go get a drink, or, I can hang out, or, no, I got to run now. It's time to go. So that got better over time. And actually in December, I wrote about how that's changed and how it's improved using my own phone, the Windows phone. There's a service called Departure Vision that New Jersey Transit has. And it's not even an app. It's just a website. It's a mobile website. And on the Windows phone, you can pin a website to your home screen, just so you just click right on it and it goes there. So right there is a pin tile on my screen to Departure Vision. And as soon as I click that, boom, I can immediately see, hey, here's when all the next trains are leaving. And I know exactly what time mine would be leaving. I can see by the color code, and obviously this is not for now, it's not live. I know exactly what I can do. And that just made life so much better. I mean, it's such a small problem and compared to the scope of these other problems in the developing world. I mean, first world problem. Let's set this context here. But this was just awesome. I mean, I love this. So I mean, that's an example of how mobile affected me. And then you can just get on your train and take your carriage home at the end of the night when things are all done. So what I want to do first is I'll talk a little bit about what Microsoft is doing in the mobile space, but also the cloud, because that's really important. And then try to wrap up with one last story before my time's up, and if we have time, maybe a little bit of a demo. So obviously, Apple introduced just unbelievable change with the iPhone. I mean, it was a watershed moment in design and everything, the impact it's had across the industry in mobile, going from your standard 9-key phone, 9-key keypad phone, to having this big screen that you can touch and interact with, because it was a software screen. The screen would change dynamically. And, in the years since then, a lot of the others in the industry have responded with competing products, including Microsoft. A little slower than I would have liked, but hey, we're here. But there is one common thread about them, that there's this pattern of everything is in apps. So when you use your phone, it's all about the apps. And if you look at all these phones, I mean, here we've got an iPhone, an Android, a BlackBerry, and I believe that's a Palm over on the right. It's essentially a grid of icons. And, it is pretty simple to use. You find what you're looking for, you just find that app, and then you have to, go back to another app to find what it is you're doing. But everything's kind of siloed on the phone. So when Microsoft decided it was time to re-engineer the phone from our previous thing, which was Windows Mobile, which was horrible, if anyone's ever used that. And I work here, and it was horrible. We came up with the new Windows Phone. And I've had this thing for about a year and a half now, and I mean, I love it. And I've used iPhones before and other things, but it's something totally different than I think what everyone else is doing. And the notion here was put people and data primary in the user experience over this notion of apps and siloed information. Make it easier to find the things you want to do. So the other thing that they did was they introduced this design language called Metro. And Metro is it's kind of like a philosophy more than almost like a language or technology. It's basically how you design things, to have things very typography driven with lots of white space, so it's easy to visualize quickly what you need to see before you get on with the show. And to that degree, integrate the data that people want to get at into the user experience instead of going to apps. So for example, here on that phone, the button in the upper left corner, it's a series of tiles on the home screen, goes into the telephone. So if you want to make a phone call, just click that and you get the keypad. But then I can have people pinned to the screen and I can interact with them. I can, it's almost like I could have them on speed dial, but I can also have information update on that screen that's dynamic. So while this might be a picture of one of my friends, this thing could be updating and overlaying information saying, hey, you've got 2 emails from this person, or that person just texted you, or this person just posted a new picture on Facebook. You could see those things update live on the tile by looking down without knowing what's going on. So this is kind of like a marketing thing here. I'm going to skip through this really. But a key thing here is the People Hub. And this to me is like the center of the phone. And I'll go in and demo this. But instead of having a contacts list, when you go into People on your phone, everything on the phone is a widescreen, picture like a widescreen window, or widescreen, and then the phone is a narrow, vertical window into that wide screen. So I can see information here, but there's information hanging off the side of the screen here, and that's an indication to me to swipe. Using gestures, I can swipe this over and move it back and forth. And very quickly, I get a list, in this example here, of status updates and things going on with my social networks. So built in, this is pulling things from Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn right there on the screen for all of my contacts. And if I swipe over, I can get to my actual contact list, click on people and get to them and all that type of stuff. We also give you the ability to group people together. So when you come in, I can create a group of friends or a group of family and then go to that group and see what's going on right there. Maybe text them all at the same time or send an email to everyone. And there you can kind of see on the lower right, one square says missed call. So for the person, whoever that was on the lower right square, I have a missed call from that person. So I can kind of see very quickly what's going on there. It's really a nice thing. And then when it comes to basic communication, texting, we're all familiar with doing texting and SMS messaging, but we integrated it with all the social networks. So you could be chatting on Facebook, but on your phone, the experience is the same as a text message. And you don't even know, well, you do know the difference because it actually will say the word. So if you look here, it's kind of hard to see in the back. This first message was sent to someone else as a text, but they responded on Facebook because maybe they were sitting at their desktop on their browser and chatted a message back on Facebook. And then when you reply back, it went back to Facebook because that's where they were. But it's all in line, so you can see your entire conversation with whoever you're speaking with. So you can do that across multiple networks. That's a really nice thing to be in there. In terms of the apps, there's a big marketplace out there of apps, obviously. Most recent data I've seen is we are up to 60,000 apps. That's in just over a year. That's pretty quick. It's actually faster than previous platforms. I know we have a long way to go to catch up, but most of the big things are there. But apps can be pinned to the home screen, or we have a long list of them. But the neat thing is this notion of tiles. And this was introduced to the phone, and very shortly, in the next week or two, when we show off our Windows 8 preview, which is coming on February 29th, you're going to see tiles are a new metaphor even in Windows itself, on the desktop or coming on tablets. And the notion here is that these tiles are live. They're not static information. So an application can update. So the weather app might put the current temperature up here. I might have an app from an airline that can give me information about my flight. Maybe share the recent headlines here from something from BBC. So apps can do that, and they do that, and that's an opportunity to very quickly show people where information would go. There's also integrated into the phone is search capabilities. There's a dedicated search button on the lower right corner down there. And when you search for things, it automatically is doing a local search by default. And it can show you applications that might have more information about what you're searching for. So if I did a generic search on the web from the search button for maybe restaurant reviews, I might get a list of restaurant reviews, but I also might get a suggestion, hey, try out Yelp, because that's a really good app. They have a lot of good restaurant review data. If I search for movies, I might get a result like that too, along with the data. So the browser in the phone it's a very fast browser with hardware acceleration, which is I think standard stuff these days. It's not anything unique. But one unique feature that I love using all the time is Local Scout. This is great because on a lot of other phones there are apps that do these things, and you have to download different apps. But with Local Scout, one push right off the home screen, it will determine your location and then give you all sorts of things to see and do. So there's actually multiple things if I go left and right on the screen. Like right here, it would give me a map of where I'm at and a list of all like food, restaurants here. If I swipe over, I get a bunch of things to see and do. So maybe if I pulled it up here in New York, it would probably bring up a lot of tourist attractions here in Midtown. Swipe it again, and it might give me shopping recommendations in stores. So if you wanted to say, hey, look, let's just go find a 4-star restaurant to go eat dinner at, one click, you come in here, and then you get to that list like that. And then if you click on any one of those, obviously it goes through to directions and map, and you can text your friends automatically and send it out a message to, hey, let's all meet here. So there's a lot of integrated scenarios there instead of having to jump out. That's an example of just the data I showed you. We had 60,000 apps. This is reported January 22nd, I think. So it's probably more than that. I know we've been going on a rate of about 10,000 apps a month new that have been growing up in the marketplace. What I want to do now is break away from the talk and just show a quick demo. So hopefully we'll get our projector going here. Our focus. Okay, so here's my phone. It's going to be a little hard to see with the light, but once we get in, it'll brighten up. And looking at the home screen, you can rearrange things the way you want them to be. Like these tiles, whether you have apps up here, you move them around, customize the way you want. But right here, I've got my two main email accounts, my personal email account and my work email account. And right there, I can see I've got 3 unread messages in one, 5 in the other. I've got my calendar here, so I can see my next upcoming appointments. I can see the same with text messaging. Now, this one here is an app I use a lot, and this is very big in the social sense, Foursquare. A lot of folks are using Foursquare to check in, to tell their friends where they are physically, what they're up to. But that is expanding. Foursquare is a startup. They're based here in New York, obviously. And one of the things that they're doing is that businesses are very interested of who's coming to their facilities, to their location. So by having people check in, it lets businesses know who their loyal customers are. They can keep track of things like that. But also, as an end user, it's gamified. So this tile, you've seen it flip over there twice while I'm speaking. It's kind of hard to see. But that is basically a leaderboard showing where I stand compared to my friends who are checking in on the point system. And then it's flipping and showing me whoever my most recent friends who've checked in. So that's Alex, and I know he's actually checked in the next room next door because he's at the one of the other meetings we have going on. And of course, if I click that, it would launch the app. I'm not going to do that. And then I can scroll up and down and see other things going on here on the phone. So, for example, there's the Weather Channel has a tile. So I can see the current temperature, and when that flips, You can't see that with the bright light, but it's basically a map, which is the radar map. It's the live radar. So if it was raining or snowing, I'd see little green or purple specks on there. So really quickly looking down and being able to do that. There's my train schedule pin there. The other thing built in is Office, so you can get your documents online. One useful thing, and this is more of a medical thing I do for myself. I suffer from migraine headaches quite frequently, and I have to journal them. So when I go to see my doctor every now and then, he can tell me what's going on. And I had a spreadsheet on my desktop that I was using. I've been doing this for the past however many years. And what I can now do is save that in Microsoft's cloud storage, which is called SkyDrive, and that is synced to my phone. So I've actually pinned that to the home screen. That's an Excel document, and I can just click that. Let's say I had a migraine right now. I can load this up and go down to the bottom here and enter in, data there. And then when I'm finished, it will save itself automatically. And when I go back home on my desktop, that's already just sitting there, that document. I don't have to touch it or anything like that. If we go in the People Hub, this is interesting here. So I'll go into People Hub and show you guys this. So here's the People Hub. And if I go in here, this is my all-up contact list. I can jump around alphabetically and choose people off the list. If I go over, this is basically the same thing I would see if I was in Facebook. It's like a news feed of all my social networks. That's not just Facebook. It's coming from Windows Live and Twitter, everything in there. And then, of course, I can see people I've interacted with most recently. So, for example, this is my teammate, Rachel. And we can see all of her details are there. And that's all getting pulled from different sources. Across the top of the screen, you can see it's pulling information I have from her in Outlook, which would be my Exchange contacts from work. It's pulling her information from Facebook and Twitter. And if I swipe over, I can see what Rachel's up to. So this is what she's saying on Twitter and then also on Facebook too. And I can interact with this. I can comment. I can reply to this stuff. I can also, it goes in and automatically brings in Rachel's pictures. So if I wanted to see what she was up to as fast as AT&T would show me, I could get pictures of Rachel and see all of her albums online and actually navigate through these things and go ahead and browse them all. And then finally, I call this the cheating spouse feature. You can see what all the communications I've had with my teammates. So I can see I've had a text message. I've had 8 emails today from her, and I can see the history of my interaction with that person. So it's really nice. And what's handy is when I've been out and about, my brother had a baby recently, and hitting the wrong things here. So when I've been out, everyone wants to see the baby pictures. So I go to my sister-in-law's entry right here, and I can swipe over to her pictures, and I can bring up pictures of my niece. So these are her mobile uploads from Facebook, and if AT&T goes fast enough, this should load a whole bunch of pictures there. And then boom, I go right into slideshow of the baby. And how great is this when you're out and about with your friends or family and you just want to show them the pictures? And I didn't have to launch any apps or anything like that. It was just integrated into the phone. The minute I got the phone, and this phone that I have here, I actually just got this phone last week. It's a new phone. All you have to do is put in your email address, your Facebook address, and your Twitter address, or whatever it is you belong to, and this data just lights up on the phone. You don't have to carry things or sync it to a computer. It just shows up, and it just comes to life. It's really fantastic how you can get back and forth on all these things. Of course, if you go up and down is the way the tiles are, and you can move them over. But if you go right, you get this vertical list of all the apps on the phone, and you can jump around alphabetically and pick out the apps that you want. I actually haven't put all my apps back on this phone from my old phone when I moved it over, but that's all the types of stuff you can do in there. So pretty interesting stuff you could do with the phone. Hopefully that gives you an idea of what Microsoft's done. It's a little bit different. But the thing is, apps have the ability to integrate into the user experience. So there's a Facebook app. I could go to Facebook app and launch it and go in there and see all the data. But it's just nice to not have to jump around all over the place just to get back and forth to see everything. So it's a really, I think it's a unique thing about Windows Phone when you go in there. So that's from the technical side of what we've done in the user experience. Next week is going to be Microsoft's release of the consumer preview of Windows 8. And what you're going to see is that we've done a lot of that type of user interface work, user experience work, into Windows itself. So the start screen, instead of having a start menu, you will have a start screen which looks more like the phone with tiles that you can rearrange with all your apps that provide live information and data back to you about what's going on with your friends and the people around you. And all of that stuff is going to be connected to the cloud. And that's where I think the real power here is, especially when we talk of mobile apps to take things to the next level. It's not just the phone, because, I mean, whether I have this phone or an iPhone or an Android or whatever, I mean, everyone's going to have something. It's the data. That's the information that's important. That's what people want. And so if we're developing things, unless you're building solitaire, you're going to need servers. You're going to need, the cloud to build things and service these devices and this mobile information and analyze it and do things with it. And that's where the cloud comes into play. So Microsoft has a cloud offering called Windows Azure. And this is a platform upon which people can build applications that run in Microsoft data centers around the world. But it's a place to host your apps or store your data, or both. And that can drive mobile applications. I mean, the power there is really incredible. I have a stat here. I think we saw one that's probably more up to date. This says 5.3 billion subscriptions. I thought we saw 6 earlier. So my stat's probably a little bit out of date. But everybody has phones. Everybody has mobile devices, whether it's a phone, a tablet, a PC, or whatever it might be. Enabling those types of solutions is really key. So from our perspective, if you're using the cloud or using our cloud platform to build your apps, we make it real easy to get started no matter what platform you're using, which I think is very different from Microsoft of 5-10 years ago, where Microsoft was all about being themselves. We work a lot more with others in the industry to make sure the technology is cross-compatible. So supporting things like Apple devices or Android devices, or even if you're a programmer, and there's lots of different computer programming languages out there, some that are made by Microsoft, others that are not, many more that are not, you can run and host all those types of things in the cloud solutions that we're offering up there with Windows Azure. So there, if you think about some of the things you can do, think about video games, things like that. I think of the stereotype of a video game being, a 12-year-old kid who's probably playing Xbox or PlayStation, all these crazy games. But one of the largest categories of video game players now, these days, 40-year-old woman playing casual social games, things like Angry Birds or some of these mobile games on their phone. It is the largest growing segment, and it's much bigger in population size than the 12 or 13-year-olds playing these shooting games, shooting each other up. And I don't think a lot of people recognize that. That's huge. So it's a huge market of things to build. Again, solving first world needs, I think, in that entertainment, recreation category. But to be able to support that number of users, you have to be able to scale and have some sort of cloud solution in the back end. And that's what's key there, to be able to support that type of demand on the end user. To that degree, we've got tools out there. I don't want to spend too much time on specifics, but you can download a lot of tools we have that help around these scenarios of gaming, online applications, mobile stuff for all the different platforms. So I want to close with one other story. I talked about my Cinderella dilemma, which was my first world problem. But there's a lot of other apps going on being built here in New York. And in fact, New York City has tons of data that are available, just from the city that they collect. And they don't really have the means to give this back to the citizenry. So what they've done is they've actually run over multiple years, this is the third one, I believe, this thing called the Big Apps Competition, where they encourage entrepreneurs and young developers to build applications that make usage of the city's data for the benefit of the people who live here. And I think this is a fantastic contests. I mean, some really great applications have come out of this, especially around public transportation, dealing with quality of life issues. You think of all the things that people report to 311 here in New York. I mean, that's just a massive amount of data that is being collected on, crime statistics, parking violations. All that data is there. You could build apps, and I've seen folks in the startup community building apps. Like around, how do I find my car? How do I find free parking? Where's the closest, whatever pharmacy or police station to where I'm located? One interesting app that I saw a woman develop here at a hackathon we hosted in December, so just 2 months ago, using New York's data, really fascinated me on how it can have a dual purpose in terms of social benefit. And it was called graffiti. So I don't know how folks here in the room feel about graffiti. Some people feel it's art, other people feel it's vandalism or something bad. But New York City has a database of locations where graffiti has been recorded from 311. So that data is made available, and this person thought we could build an app that would appeal to the people who feel it's artwork, and say, let's look up what's around me and see if I can find there's any graffiti being reported, and I can go take a picture of it because I want to collect the artwork, or I just want to go visualize it as a tourist. That would be great. You can even maybe gamify it, give points, for how much artwork you collect compared to your friends, or show it off. And it could appeal to folks on that nature. But at the same time, it could be doing a benefit by sending the photo information and data back to the city so they can know where to send cleanup crews to repair it if it's vandalism. So it kind of serves a dual purpose, because a lot of times someone will just report something to 311, it gets entered in the system, but they don't know what it is or what it looks like. So you can make it like a game, so people do both. It'll benefit by helping clean up some of the vandalism, but also appeal to people who like it. So I thought that was an interesting story, and that was a neat thing of something I've seen different, done uniquely here in New York with technology. So with that, I will wrap up.
Thank you so much. I think that last story is a great introduction for JD, because I know that part of that is about the idea of the exploration of the city and how technology is finding a place in there. What I think is probably going to be one of the more interesting things, is that we're going to imagine this idea of a little bit of ambiguity about whether something's a good thing or a bad thing. Might be a part of the conversation for both JD and Daniel coming up.
Oh, you.
Evening. I'm JD Hollis. I run a small design and strategy consultancy called Near Far Studio, and we deal with a lot of these issues, both mobile technology in the city and kind of a more contextual level. So a lot of the technologies that we all take for granted with our phones and things are dependent on multiple layers of other technologies, most of which are completely invisible to us. These are becoming increasingly visible thanks to the efforts of companies like IBM, Microsoft, Cisco, who are trying to take all of these different sensor readings and different experiences of the city, mostly from a managerial perspective, and make them visible, make them something that you can get out there and see and work with. But I want to talk a little bit about technologies that are not so visible. It's a sprinkler system. Interestingly enough, most sprinkler and fire systems in the city are not actually wired up to networks. I mean, they are internally, but quite often fire systems are still rather old and actually involve a security guard getting the fire alert, picking up the phone, and calling the fire department. You might have seen these boxes attached to most of the buildings around. This is actually a water meter. It's got 3G on it. It's wireless. I mean, it's obviously wired into the water system. It can detect leaks, water pressure, all sorts of information like that. And it's sent wirelessly to other places. It's an utterly mundane object, but it's how our city's wired up. It's how our city works. What's intriguing is that we take all of these technologies for granted. I think I read a statistic somewhere that said that if we shut off the power in New York City, Manhattan would be underwater in 48 hours. The city here is utterly dependent upon power, and all of these different systems add up. And it can be both a beautiful thing and also a potentially troubling thing, depending on how these things are used. So, for example, this is a fairly complex assemblage of objects. I think this is actually from Bristol, perhaps, in the UK. However, it's not always readily apparent how these different objects come together to create a system, in this case, a access control system. You've got an RFID reader here, and then some kind of arm, of course, or actually, in this case, often barriers that raise and lower. You can see versions of this on Wall Street, of course, and all throughout the city. It's not always apparent who controls these or why you're denied access and someone else is not. But these are scattered throughout our public spaces, and they ultimately create a form of privacy or a form of access control that's not always quite as obvious as a security guard or someone that you can come up to and say, "Hi, I would like to go through here. Why can I not go in?" There's no appealing this. The software decides whether you go in or not, and it's not always apparent where that software is. This is another thing I think everybody's seen in the city. These are kind of amazing devices, actually. I think they cost something on the order of $10,000 a box. They're entirely wireless. They're bolted down. They always have interesting signs saying that removal is not authorized or requires authorization, as if you could figure out a way to cut the thing off the top. Maybe kind of a Cool Hand Luke scene with Munimeters. However, these things are incredibly complex. They know where they are in the city. You set them down. You don't even have to plug them in. They run on solar power. And it knows, it actually has very little software on the system itself besides just the, just the parking stuff. And so from that standpoint, it's utterly simple, ridiculous, easy device, but it's got to be up and running all the time. And again, it communicates over a network. This is actually just some fun graffiti, actually, that Adam Greenfield, someone I've been working closely with, found. Public space is absolutely essential to citizenship, especially in a democracy. We all live in an increasingly urban environment. Worldwide, this is becoming increasingly the norm as people move into cities. And it's absolutely essential that we understand and negotiate the types of technologies that we accept into our lives. And one of the challenges that we have right now is that we have technologies that can be both good and bad, depending on where you are on the spectrum. A great Microsoft example, actually, is recently, and I'm not even sure what it's actually officially called, but the Avoid Ghetto app for GPS that basically routes you around ghetto. Well, that's an incredibly problematic thing. What defines a ghetto? Where did that data come from? Who made the decision that this is not a place that you would want to go? Also, by circumscribing that space and saying, okay, nobody should go here, so we're going to route around it. How do we reintegrate those spaces and get them brought back into the fabric of the city? It's a great technology. It serves a very practical purpose if you want to navigate safely, potentially. But you have you don't necessarily have visibility into how that software is inscribing your journey, is controlling and managing how you get through the city. And we need more transparency on things. We have to be critical of these technologies because while I may not want to walk down a certain street at a certain time of day, at the same time, that doesn't mean that we should avoid that place entirely, because in a way that would merely amplify the issue. And the other side of this also is control of public spaces. We see this, of course, with Occupy Wall Street. You have privately owned public spaces. Who controls access to these things? Sometimes it is technological systems. Sometimes it's people. And we have to create a lot of space for us as citizens to participate. I mean, we walk down the street every day, and we constantly are negotiating public and private space, both in personal, our personal space, who we talk to, who we look at, and we have often interacting with our mobile devices throughout all of that. And in order to understand the systems that are it's very easy to walk down the street, right? and not look up ever. You know, we're in New York. You look up and there's just these amazing views, and I don't do it frequently at all. And realizing that, you know, that you've got to see the city around you. You've got to see what you're looking at. And sometimes it's noticing the little gray boxes that are attached to buildings and saying, okay, well, what does this do? One of the things that my partner and I would love to do is organize what we call a walk shop here in New York, and just, you know, set a couple of blocks of space, you know, out and saying, okay, we're going to get together with 15 people and walk around, take photographs, look at these things, figure out how they work, what are they connected to. Because network technology is often so much more interesting and also so much more invisible than simply what we do on our phones. And all of these things have a drastic impact on our experience of the city. And unless we notice them and unless we're looking at them, we can't make valid, informed decisions of, is this something that we want impacting our urban experience, us living in the city? And, you know, we have a lot of responsibility because, you know, we are in New York City, and a lot of other places look to us, look to how we run things here. And as cities continue to urbanize, we've got to make good decisions because other people are watching, so that we can help them make better decisions. You know, and sometimes that's in terms of like choosing the mobile apps that we develop, or, you know, choosing whether or not to deploy a particular set of sensors. How are the sensors used? This is why open data is so critical in a way. You know, let's see the data that's being collected and what can we do with that. Is it traffic? Is it, you know, environmental? Anything like that. We also have to be sensitive to the fact that sometimes things don't work out quite the way we would like. I think the MTA has certainly had its share of troubles with screens and systems, and you know, keeping an eye on that, like how that can impact us with delays or just, you know, general annoyances. I think we've all seen, you know, moments like this, and these things are unfortunately likely to become increasingly common as we allow more of these systems into our lives, and as more of these systems are added to our lives, whether or not we made a decision to accept them. My firm is actually, we've done a lot of work, particularly in the city and with network systems. We spend a lot of time thinking about these things, and we live in the city, and we care about having a fantastic urban experience. You know, whether it's me just getting up in the morning and going to brunch on, you know, Saturday. You know, do I want to be plugged into my phone at that moment? No, I want to be looking around. I want to be engaged in the space around me. So what kind of technologies and systems can we look at that are going to enhance that, or at the very least just stay the hell out of the way and let me enjoy the sunlight? But we would be happy to talk with more people who are interested in these themes. We are looking to help people figure out, like, kind of come to grips with what kind of things that we can develop, and how can this impact your strategy for your businesses. Thanks.
Thank you. I think that one of the most inspiring things for me, when I was saying I was on that treasure hunt for inspiration, is one of these ideas that JJ was talking about, that mobile technology isn't the phone, it's what surrounds us. Thank you.
I just wanted to kind of wake things up a bit, just to get to know who's here. So before I begin, can I just get a sense of how many of you are in IT departments? Okay, so maybe about a third. So you've heard about all these different contexts and products. You've heard about some case studies. You've heard about some framing about the urban environment. And what I want to leave you with is the places or the context of where mobile happens. So kind of continuing on from where JD was taking you, I wanted just to first begin by introducing myself. So I've been in the business, in the digital business for about 14, 15 years, professionally speaking. Pretty much since the web began, learning how to program when there wasn't any books or O'Reilly or schools. And then recently, at Project for Public Spaces, we've adapted Ushahidi, which was mentioned earlier, for urban context, for doing civic participation around urban planning. So instead of talking about things that are on fire or underwater, we're using Ushahidi to talk about the slow crisis, which is the sort of urban crisis. We have 200,000 people moving into urban environments every day. And there's about 1 million per week for the next 30 years, is kind of at the current rates of urbanization. The cities don't have the funding. We're in economic crisis for a number of reasons. And how are we going to deal with all of that? So the legal issues, the product issues, the marketing issues, the nonprofit issues, we're going to all need to come together in our various firms and figure out how we're all going to live together in this increasingly urban environment. Briefly, I've worked in all different types of corporate contexts since the first bubble. And then basically what happened is after 9/11, I kind of had, sort of a realization that I wanted to go more into the civil society sector. So I slowly shifted from video games and entertainment media and advertising firms into education technology, and then now I'm currently in urban planning technology, I guess you could say, at Project for Public Spaces, which is an international nonprofit that does community-centered urban planning, where we kind of, basically you could say we do user-centered design or human-centered design for cities. So, mobile, why you're all here tonight. So, part of what we talked about tonight is what's on this woman's screen and what's on that man's screen, or what those phones are. But I want to talk about what's around them and how do we find out, how do we make those places better. Are they looking for transit information? Are they looking for a date? Are they looking for any other sorts of civic information that you can imagine? I mean, there's all sorts, but maybe one of them is actually giving feedback on how their local park is going to be redesigned, or the rules related to Zuccotti Park, let's say, and there's going to be a big legal challenge around that, and how are we going to get the people's voices heard over other forces, for example. So we've been making tools, handheld devices for some time, about 54,000 human generations. And then, we've innovated them and we've used them as different input devices, and of course now we've been using them to talk to each other. And what are we talking about? A lot of it is, where are we? What are you doing? What's happening? And a lot of this is, of course, the place for this is happening in cities. This is one of the worst, or formerly one of the worst, most dangerous barrios or slums in Medellin, Colombia, which happens to be where I was born, in Bogota, actually. But this place was transformed through a very unique process of social urbanism, of highly inclusive participatory planning. In Medellin, they had this program called the Red de Redes, or Network of Networks, and they used traditional in-person community gatherings, and then also their digital networks. And this was over the past several years, when the digital penetration and usage wasn't at the rates that we were just told earlier at the beginning of this talk. So, what are the possibilities? That's one thing that you're probably thinking about. But the other thing that I want to have you think about is, what do we need, and how do we find out what do we, the planet, need? So another concept to kind of load into your head that we can talk about over the next weeks and months is that one idea is that we're in this situation called the Gutenberg parenthesis. How many of you, by show of hands, have heard of this idea before? All right, briefly. We've been sort of suffering from this print media that has led us to have this over-infatuation with originality and individuality and autonomousness and stability and having sort of what is the canon of knowledge, or what is the, who decides what knowledge is, what's in and out of knowledge. But before that, before 1500, things were much more contextual and relational. There was lots of collective association rather than individual. Things were unstable, but that was life. Life was change, and that wasn't necessarily a scary thing. Now, in our digital era, we're basically reawakening to our sociality, to our collective consciousness, to our connectedness. And especially here in the States, we've been priding ourselves on individuality to a fault. And that's led us down into some rat holes, into some sort of weird places that all of a sudden we realize, this isn't the society that we really want to be in. So how can we use mobile technology to sort of remix or be involved in sampling and appropriating what we have right now to make better places? So one of the ways that I want to talk about is this placemaking process, which is the process that the nonprofit that I work at uses, which they've developed over 35 years. And I think there's some inspiration if you take some abstracted, metaphor from this as to how you can be working and creating and designing your technology. So this is a picture of Winston Churchill. So after World War II, they had to rebuild London, and there was lots of discussion about architecture and design. And he has a famous quote saying that, as we build our buildings, and thereafter they build us. So there's this idea of environments, of how the stuff that we build then in turns affects us, and that's part of some of the points that JD was just making. So when we're making mobile technology, how is that going to affect us? The case study in Afghanistan, yes, that you gave, right? Yeah. So that was an example of this environmental, system. It's a complex system with multiple layers, and how do we design and work for that reality, rather than just thinking about the individual object and what type of features it does. So of course now our world isn't just places; it's also highly networked. And people are using all this technology, as has been mentioned, for all sorts of reasons. But what we keep finding is that so many people are using all of this powerful technology for things related to democratic liberation or increasing human rights, and in general, let alone increasing rights to the city. That's what people want to talk about, in addition to Justin Bieber and other things, or famous basketball players. Which is all good. We all need to have our entertainment. So, but more importantly, how do families safely raise their children? So back to that point, here's sort of the human-centered design or user-centered design approach that we use at Project for Public Spaces. So on the left here, you see sort of a traditional engineering approach in architecture, design, and construction, which is, you start with a problem. You already assume that you know what it is. You identify the constraints, your scope, etc. It's funny, I've been in this room many times over the past 10 years for the Project Management Institute, often is met here. And so this is sort of a critique of how do we get out of sort of bigger, more holistic thinking. Project management is great, but that's when you really know what you should be doing. So let's go back to the diagram. So you design to avoid constraints, then you evaluate, et cetera, and then at some point, maybe here you do public input after you kind of loaded all these assumptions in. And then oftentimes what happens, and maybe not so much in agile projects because you're happening in such faster cycles, but on bigger projects, that's when all of a sudden the public or your users will say, I don't like it. This doesn't make sense. Why are you building this? I want something else. I don't want a dog park. I want a skate park. I want something else. Or I don't want a backgammon game. I want an easy way to socially connect with my friends. So the other way to approach it is user-centered design, or more of a human-centered approach, which is you don't start with design or problems at all. You just start with who are your users, and you hang out with them, and you talk with them. You get them to evaluate it themselves. So that's not just focus groups. That's actually being in an interactive relationship with the people and the places or the context of the usage of what you're doing. You do a lot of that. You don't just have a couple meetings and kind of keep it at a token level. You really get sort of help build a movement or connect with that community. Then from that you have a vision. You actually have an authentic vision of what people want. So you're not really leading and controlling, your product development or project development. You're facilitating. You're orchestrating. And then from that, then you can kick in sort of the project management process, because then you're starting with good, authentic stuff. And then that, of course, any of the optimizations of the PMBOK or of agile methods and whatever you have in between that, then it's all of a sudden you can be the super efficient superstars and heroes that are making awesome stuff that is going to be really useful for the world. So in this case, from a project management or design standpoint in urban design, what we do at Project for Public Spaces is we divide spatial context, place context into these 4 areas. You want to assess sociability. You want to look at uses and activities, then comfort and image, and then access and linkages. And then there are qualitative and quantitative aspects to that that we've observed are really meaningful or indicative of how can you make a great place. Now remember, think about this if you're talking about mobile and you're involved in making a mobile app or a mobile product or mobile sensors or some type of physical objects. What if you would take this type of consciousness into your consideration of understanding the spatial context of your products, of your apps, so that you're sort of designing around your product rather than focusing on just your product. So some of the qualitative things for sociability, let's think about that from just because there's been many social media examples before. You want to see about the diversity of it. You want to see who are the stewards, what type of cooperation is happening, is it neighborly, is there pride about that place, is it friendly, etc. Now again, we're talking about great places. Quantitatively, what is the actual numbers and demographics, what type of level of volunteer support or maintenance is there, and just in general, what is the nature, quantitatively, the street life, what are the traffic flows. So kind of like the web analytics, your Google analytics of a place. Okay. Then what we do is then we have meetings and we then talk with users, in-person meetings and then also digitally. So and the reason why, again, the importance of people is, how many of you here are familiar with Jane Jacobs? Okay, so about a fourth. She was not a professional designer. She was an amateur, amateur activist, or became one in the West Village, and she basically stopped Robert Moses from designing a giant sort of Brooklyn Queens expressway-like monstrosity through the Lower East Side and the West Village. So if any of you have had awesome times down there or romantic evenings or good meals, you can thank Jane Jacobs for that. And part of what she had to say, and I call her the godmother of social media, is that she was of digital placemaking. Is that she said that when in a neighborhood, when people talk to each other and connect with each other, that's when you find out what is really needed. So think about hyperlocal blogs and Foursquare and Twitter check-ins and Facebook updates. How many of those updates are about places and about what's happening and what's the news of the street? This is where so much of it's happening. In addition to, of course, hanging out at a local store at a local deli and hearing that in person. So what we've done, just to give one sort of actual product example, is in this adaptation of Ushahidi, we've made what I call place maps. And we've done this now in about 7 different cities in the U.S. and now a couple in Sweden. And we also have a 5-year partnership now with the United Nations Habitat, which is the group that is involved in, of course, how we house and where we live. So we need to figure out, again, using mobile technology and increasing variety of digital forms of technology, how are we all going to communicate and coexist. You think about the Olympics and the World Cup in Rio and all of the pressures on favelas and rights to the city there. Multiply that times all of the top 30 largest cities on the planet. And there's a lot of, we don't have systems in place for that. So there's a huge need for this context. And a lot of all of that, this mobile technology, is about people talking to each other. So it isn't even the app itself. It isn't even really the technology. That isn't really the problem. It's not the problem or the solution, finding the magic one. It's like, how do we enable us to connect? How do we enable each other to connect to each other? How do we break down that friction? I think that's maybe an abstract way to talk about it. So for those of you that are in IT or are programmers, you may be familiar with Christopher Alexander, who's basically sort of like the grandfather of object-oriented programming. He's actually an architect, and he came up with all these design patterns for architecture in this famous book called A Pattern Language. But being out in, I guess, near Stanford, all the programmers got more inspired by that, and that's why we have object-oriented C, for example, and then other languages since then. So recently, this quote wasn't in the book, but he was in an interview on WNYC or some public radio program, talking about the sort of irony of how he's more famous to programmers and not necessarily every architect is aware of him. And he basically was just saying that what one would hope is that pieces of software make each person that encounters that software more of a person. where all of us are more capable of doing harm to other people by simply treating them or our transactions as something machine-like. That danger is right there at the core of it, and yet this very computer phenomenon also has the capacity to go to a much, much richer place that actually makes a person more humane and caring. So I'm not trying to pull a hippie thing on you guys here, but I mean, this is just, from all walks of life, from all backgrounds and beliefs and whatnot, we need to figure out how to care about each other more. Sometimes we need to protest, and sometimes we need to take up the streets to do that when there's too much friction. But I think mobile technology has the opportunity to prevent a lot of that if we allow each other to connect around the places that we live. So with that, I just went 1 minute over my time, but thank you for your attention late on a
We are officially out of time. I understand some of you might have some time constraints. I'm going to say that we have about 10 or 15 minutes or so of Q&A time, if you'd like to. If you're able to stay with us, that would be great. We really appreciate those things. I almost feel like I need to apologize for taking up too much time because we have such excellent panelists. So let's quickly get to it. I'm going to start right here in the first row. Just a couple of questions.
Yeah. The two panelists over there, you were talking about the first world and the third world, and you were talking about the cloud and Facebook and so on. And I was wondering, it seems as if people in our society are able to lose more and more time than they ever have in the past. I can hardly actually finish walking down a street without knocking somebody over because they're busy texting. So the question is, are you worried that we are going to move that over to the third world and make them as incapable of accomplishing anything as we are?
I guess I'll start. I have to say, it's not the first thing I think of when there's just so many other problems at the moment in the developing world still. But it has occurred to me, and I will share with you, when I worked in Afghanistan, that more than one of my staff, asked me for an iPhone. I mean, there were many problems going on in Afghanistan, and they don't actually even have the system that you could use an iPhone for, but it was the image, right? This is what they want, even though they don't know what it really does yet. I want the thing that gives me the freedom to get information and do what I want and communicate. And that's what I understood he was asking for. There's so many good applications to this that I'm not yet worried that we're going to have people all over the world bumping into each other, staring at their phones. However, not everything is 100% good or 100% bad. And yes, are we exposing whoever we are, the world to a different way of thinking, a different way of interacting? Yes. I also say cultures are different, and different people will adopt different ways. It won't all be exactly like it is here.
Well, it's intriguing, too, thinking about the time when I lived in Kyrgyzstan, and this was maybe 2005, 2006, and honestly, texting there was much more prevalent than it was in the U.S. at the time. Simply for cost reasons. It's cheaper to send a text message than it is to get on the phone and talk. I think that, it's intriguing seeing how fast that technology is spread to different places and how it's appropriated differently in different cultures. So while we're very much engaged with our screens, other cultures, they still use the same technology, but they don't engage with it for the same reasons or for the same way.
Same thing. I think it's just going to be the way people change and adjust to things. On one of the slides earlier, there was the picture of the woman on the bicycle and the guy on the motorcycle, and he was asking question. You were asking, like, are they thinking about civic space, or whatever? And I'm thinking they're writing about Justin Bieber or what their girlfriend or boyfriend's doing for dinner. I mean, that's what most people are doing, and that's just human nature. I just think having the technology lets us do that in places public places where we would normally not do that. That's just a change in culture. I mean, I think people will just adjust to that. I mean, if you think about it, like, there's always going to be etiquette around these things. So how many times we go into the movie theater and someone's yapping on the phone? I'd say that was probably really prevalent a while back. It's probably less prevalent now because I think there is an etiquette. Like, you don't turn your phone on in the theater, else you're going to get something thrown at you. Whereas when cell phones were first getting popular here, let's say 10, 15 years ago, there's always someone doing that. So, yeah, I think just culture will adjust to it.
Yeah. I love there's a great play, The Physicist. One of the final lines there is, once a thought's been thought, it can't really be unthought. So, to take that away from anything. Another question, maybe? I know we've taken you a lot of time. Yes, go ahead.
Susan Crawford wrote an op-ed in the Times about the digital divide between people who have wired connections and people who when you're on mobile. Do you want to address that?
I love that question because it gets asked every single time I'm ever on a panel about digital media, especially mobile. So the way that I have a protocol for this, you have to define what you mean by digital divide.
Well, the people who can do high bandwidth applications against people, and people on desktops who have the ability to cut and paste and create in a way that people on cell phones really can only consume.
Okay, great. So just basic access to broadband, and then part of I think what you're talking about is media literacy, or what is the sort of education level
there's
of?
Two aspects, and one is the broadband, and the other one is there are things you can do on a
Right.
laptop or a desktop that you can't do on a
Yeah, read write versus read only, and So, for an audience, when we're talking about making apps for the future and how are we going to be doing this and testing things and developing things, I basically think that the digital divide is a red herring because it completely distracts from the need to start testing and developing things now with the people who are online right now. Because if you think about your product development cycles, it takes a while to get something that works, that you know that you actually have something working. And at the same time, of course, there are adoption rates around the world where all of these things are growing. So, oftentimes some organizations, what they do is they say, oh, we'll wait. We won't invest. We won't start developing this. We'll slow down. We'll keep it text, SMS-based only. And there's a certain amount of prudence to that. But what I've seen is that in general, it stifles the ability to dive in and come up with something innovative about where we're going to be. Because any good product manager knows that you have to be kind of guessing where the third bounce is going to be 2 years from now, and working with that sort of mentality. And you need to not think about the digital divide. You need to think about, or at least where you need to think about where the digital divide will be 5 years from now or 2 years from now.
And the digital divide's not an excuse for inaction. You need to understand why it exists, where it exists, and how that impacts your product and your strategy. There's an interesting question though in terms of read write versus read only. A lot of these devices. When I bought this thing, I had no idea what I was going to do with it. I bought it to develop an app for it, and now I use it primarily to read. But I actually surprisingly use it for a fair bit of writing as well, and that was unexpected. So I think we're starting to see like a little bit more of a generativity in the context of these devices. Even with just iPhones, I take Instagram photos all the time. Whether that's quite the same level as pulling up Photoshop or developing a piece of software, no, certainly not. But again, it goes back to the context in which these things are used. You don't always need the ability to do Photoshop, in the bar, because you're there with people, you're there enjoying wine, beer, whatever. And it's something that I think Microsoft pushed very much with Windows Phone in the marketing, was the idea that you get in and then get out of your screen and get back to living your life, which are very entertaining commercials. But it's interesting how we're concerned about the digital divide in the sense that, you're talking about the difference in devices and the form of access. I'm more concerned about the fact that there's a fair number of people that can't afford smartphones at all, yet we're developing a whole lot of systems that assume access to those. And that is much more troubling, because we've got to be looking at, are we making sure that there's open access no matter what kind of device you use? And that's especially in civic applications and open data.
The only thing I would add to that is there's a lot said in my field about the digital divide and how parts of the world are being left behind as others are moving ahead. And while there's certainly truth to that, the other thing that you see is that when technologies are developed in more of the developing worlds, it enables the developing worlds to kind of leapfrog technologies, and the mobile phone is exactly an example of that. I don't know if anywhere in Africa you've had a landline. Because you don't need it. You can skip it. And by the time people are getting their phones, it started with Nokia phones in a lot of Africa, they were a lot cheaper than the ones we bought here. Still out of reach to a lot of people, yes. But then people are creative, and so one person in their family gets a phone, not everybody. Or one person in their village gets a phone. It's not perfect, but I don't think the divide, as I agree, is as dire as some people say. And where it is dire, it's the same kind of situation you have with the education divide and the access to services divide. All around the world is not equal. But to be aware of that and to try to create access in different ways is a good thing. And I think technology is great in that sense in getting more people on board.
Earlier when I was talking about how some of the startup events I've been to where people are creating ideas for apps and stuff, and I thought they're very limited to first world problems, so to speak, and problems specific to people here in New York. And I thought, oh, maybe that's shallow, maybe not. But then, out of that comes stuff that will then, you can't predict how that will impact or change for everyone else. And, when you look at, you said we can't slow down innovation because not everyone's going to have it at first. Most of these things filter down. When the iPhone first came out, it was $600. I mean, I think that we're partnering with Nokia. I think within 2 or 3 years, these phones are going to be the same as the cheap phones you get now for free. So the notion of eventually everyone will have these phones, I think that's inevitable. How long, whether it's 1 year, 2 year, or 5, I don't know. But technology will eventually always reach everyone.
Actually, so just this thing about equity, because that was kind of one of the themes in the panel was about justice, right? So one of your example before with the transit, like when's my train going to come? And your question was just about equity. Here's one thing that I think is pretty fascinating is that, so we think that we need to save there's all these problems in the world. Let's go out and go find where they are and go save them. Well, we create a lot of problems right here. And in fact, many of those emanate, and then, we create music videos with escalades and, always make sure we can't remove parking from streets. And then all of a sudden the rest of the world wants escalades. And what is that going to do? Is that even possible? Is that tenable? So transit apps, they've done studies that show that when people know or are aware of when the next bus or train is, that ridership goes up. So then that means it removes the friction from thinking that my independent private automobile is more efficient. And so if we consume less gas, drive less, change our cities, make it more pedestrian friendly, etc., the carbon footprint and the lifestyle and quality of happiness and all things, that can be, a very a longer term effect, but perhaps can be a much more equitable sort of jujitsu or sort of acupressure point to focus on, rather than only saying how do we get smartphones in the hands of everyone in the sort of the last mile or the last 10%, which should also be done.
I was calling this person back here, so.
Sure, and this is for all of you, whoever feels comfortable answering. What's your perspective or your vision in terms of the role of open hardware, in terms of how the communities interact with each other, whether it's public spaces in urban locations and otherwise? And then just sort of a second part to that, how many of you guys, in terms of your organizations and ventures, are actually working together on a particular problem? I mean, right now we sort of talk about collaboration, but we all kind of operate in our own silos. So I'm just curious, one, about the role of open hardware, and then also, are there any projects in which any of you are working together on a project now or in the future?
Working together as in?
Just any of you guys collaborating on anything. I mean, I feel like I've heard some overlap in some ways about public space and about interaction design. So are any of your organizations working with each other, or others that you could highlight some projects where there's some collaboration in some of the things you guys have talked about tonight?
Oh, we're trying to, actually. We're working on a proposal for a lighting project in Lower Manhattan, which may very likely involve open hardware, actually, as part of the implementation. So it's one of those things where, there's a lot of overlap, and sometimes it's really hard to find the space or the projects to get together on. But I'm totly open to working with any of these people.
Yeah, in a way, it's kind of funny. So right now we're having some informal chats with Nokia in the sort of like CSR, side of things in Chicago, because they want to find different ways to, how can they kind of rethink using mobile apps with the new platform that Nokia switched to. Working with you in Habitat, so in a way, you know, like in the same zone that you're in, I'm kind of surprised that we haven't met before.
Well,
but I feel like, you know,
one of my biggest clients right now is UN Habitat.
Oh, okay.
So indirectly, we're kind of vectoring in on similar issues, and even in our case, a similar organization. So I guess what I would say, I think, I don't want to speak for everyone else, but people that do this kind of work tend to be very open to collaboration. The challenges come often in where you get your either funding or clients from. And clients aren't always that interested in hiring 3 of you. They're interested in hiring maybe one company or one of you as a consultant. And these are some of the challenges I've found, is that while there's a lot of technology and thinking that talks about collaboration, when it really comes down to how do you pay for it, it doesn't always sync up.
I mean, I guess in a way I'm in a much different space than everyone else on the panel. I mean, I work for a corporation that's selling a product or technology, and so my goal is to get people using it. But I mean, to the degree of helping, I mean, what my role is actually is the community liaison for Microsoft here in New York. So I guess in a tangential way, by hosting and facilitating a lot of the community events we do, like things like the bar camp or other things like hackathons where people come out and we encourage innovation, is kind of, I guess, way you could say we contribute back. I mean, obviously there's a dual-edged thing. I'm interested in folks building things using our technology because it's helping use our services, but at the same time it's also benefiting folks. So that'd be my...
The open hardware thing, just so I always like to abstract. So openness in general, I mean, I'm a big advocate for, if you're talking about public space in the commons, so we have a digital commons and sort of idea commons or patent commons, and there's the physical commons. And I think definitely when it comes to that, there needs to be space for openness, for having open hardware and all the things that you mentioned, because some of those things they're often underfunded, and so the only way that we can scale or have efficient commons is through open technology, and there's always going to be a hybrid reality of private, public, etc., and it's not either or.
I was just going to say, my perspective, I did a little contribution to some people were working on an open platform mobile device. The Open Voco project was a number of years ago. It was very disappointing. Mobile technology has this problem of being, at this point anyway, incredibly miniaturized and very, very high tech and subject to a lot of patents, a lot of intellectual property, a lot of focus like that. I'm sort of torn about the idea of, like, I tried carrying a Linux phone and these kinds of things for a little while. It was frustrating, and that's for me in a developed world with a lot of software and being a technologist myself. And I wonder how much we delay, particularly mobile technology, getting out at scale. If we are, I remember there were issues about getting a Wi-Fi chip running on that device because we couldn't. The project couldn't find an integrated circuit that had an open license with it. Right? It just couldn't be done. It wasn't available, and it was impractical at that scale to build it. And that's a bit of a problem. I do think we had talked just briefly about this, the idea of like mesh networking, right? Being able to deploy open Wi-Fi points and things like that. That's cool stuff. I think it's great, but it works at a very different scale. It's not as personal as an individual mobile device. It's a different kind of device. The biggest thing for me is going back to mobile development because it's so small scale. I had stopped programming for a while, and I kind of came back to it in the last 2 or 3 years. It's literally changed the way I collaborate with anybody when I'm writing, even when it's a private project, because of GitHub and shareable software. And the idea, not necessarily that every ideal that Richard Stallman ever pledged honor to is out there, but that the culture of sharing is incredibly changed. And I find myself interacting with programmers from a lot of different perspectives that I would never have been around before. Having been in a corporate place writing software, now I'm talking to people that are in different places around the globe, have different levels of education, different specialties, different passions. To me, the software thing is solvable in the mobile perspective. The hardware one is a really, really, really difficult one when you talk about that miniaturized device, or at least at this point right now. That's what I'm saying.
But also, speaking about that culture of openness and sharing, it's spreading well beyond software now. I mean, I know that a lot of the work going on in synthetic biology, for instance, is taking an open source model, which is intriguing on a lot of levels, in the sense that, first of all, the idea that you're treating biology as software or as source code. But at the same time, it's great in terms of transparency, because when people are working on something like that, there's a lot of room for fear, a lot of room for abuse, and having a community that's keeping an eye on itself and also then giving back into it, it's going to lead to better advances and much quicker advances.
I think so. I'm going to have to limit us to one more, because I think we're going to get chased out. You got one.
I've got a good other one.
You won't get chased out. Did you have one in the back?
Sure. I think about voting technology. It's what I do, and I just wanted to add one small anecdote to the bank of really interesting anecdotes about the developing in the third world. And I think I read a report somewhere in South America. They were using mobile phones. Basically, people would go into the voting booths, which were supposed to be secret and private, and they would take pictures of the votes they cast as a way of getting paid for. So it was part of the corruption. And because the phone technology was so cheap, it was really possible for that administration, whatever locality it was, to essentially buy citizens' votes, because they
called open voting.
Yeah, by giving them cheap mobile phones.
Well, transparency contributing to corruption.
Wow,
that's impressive.
And it's a way of cheating in voting that would not have been possible a few years ago.
That's an extraordinary story. Mm-hmm. So more so, I think, than we have in the past with the at least the projects that I've been a part of here at New York Tech Council. I want to update the website that is associated with this event with the contact information for the people on our panel who would like to share that. Certainly, I would. And also, if I can put some of the decks out and make them available, and we'll do that. You seem to be very eager.
Well, I have one question, if you don't mind. Cloud computing. Apple, Microsoft, Google, they're all into it pretty heavily. If you have, it seems like if you have a device, an iPhone, a Windows phone, or an Android, they seem to say that they interact with them all and play nicely. Does anybody on the panel know or have any experience with cloud computing? Which one's the best one to go with?
Depends on a host of things. It depends on a lot of things, in terms of both what you're trying to do, and also just what your needs are. For example, you've got Amazon. Amazon is fantastic for scaling things up. However, you really have to roll your own software there. You have to set everything up, get it configured, and manage it. The challenge in picking different platforms at this point is primarily that if you want to take full advantage of Amazon, then you've got to commit to it, and you're to some extent locked into their way of doing things, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, the fact is, all of these companies have tackled incredibly hard problems, and you yourself are not going to do better than them at this point, at a small scale. But a lot of it really just comes down to your particular needs, whatever application that you're envisioning. And to some extent, a lot of these are somewhat interchangeable, actually. That's kind of the whole point. Some of them are more so than others, and it really just depends on how much you build down into that particular cloud stack.
So I spend pretty much my full-time job is on cloud computing and around Windows Azure, which is the Microsoft offering. So I guess I can't give a true, honest opinion, not being biased as to which one I like, but I agree with most of the things he said there, which is pretty much it depends on what you're doing. When you say cloud computing, you ask 10 different people what that means, and they'll give you 10 different answers. There's all different variances between being a raw platform that you create things and build programs and applications on, to cloud computing where you consume it as a service, and you want to find out, hey, look, I just need to consume this service that someone else is building. So when you look at the different options out there, there's this notion of software as a service, which is, hey, I'm just going to use something like, for example, you might use Gmail from Google to do your email and your calendar, and you might use SkyDrive from Microsoft to do your documents or something like that. That's a usage model. Software as a service. Whereas there's this, the other notion where you're going to build an app, compare something like Amazon and Azure, that you'll see they're much more similar, where you're writing programming code to host an app that you build as a developer that will then support the mobile apps. And in that case, if you're building the app yourself, then you have full control over what it interacts with. And just have one or the other. But that's a key differentiation there. You have to add to your question is, what are you looking for? A platform to build things or a platform to consume things?
Using like a little suite of office products to organize all of our daily activities and speakers and Google has one calendar, Gmail.
Yep.
If you're going to, if somebody else was using a different platform, how well would that transfer over to a Windows product or a Apple product?
I would say fairly easily, because everybody's kind of agreed on a lot of the standards for those technologies. I mean,
for most of that stuff, yeah. So in that context that you're asking, that's more of the software as a service. I want to use Gmail to manage my email, my calendar, and stuff. So a lot of that is standard stuff. So I mean, I have Gmail here on my phone. It works really well. But then there's other aspects that don't. So for example, Google has apps around Google Plus, their social network now, or they've got apps around their mapping. So Google doesn't build any apps on the Windows platform right now. Their stuff all works in the browser and it works great, but there's no apps. Whereas at the iPhone they might, and of course Android is a Google product, so obviously they have all the apps too. If you look at some of the offerings that Microsoft's doing, like we have obviously Hotmail and SkyDrive for your storage and Office Online documents. We've actually built apps for some of those services on the iPhone first, before they came available on the Windows Phone. So we've been doing that. So we've got apps on all the major platforms to access our services. But I mean, without giving you the biased opinion, I think you need to just evaluate what it is you're doing and then what types of devices you're going to use and compare. You're going to find that there's differences along the way.
I'm sorry that we have to take it to the end. We do. They're going to chase us out of here. We're a half hour over. But come on, you can talk to us afterwards. Thank you very, very much, especially you guys that were able to hang out so late.
Can you give us a website?
Yeah, let me give you two things. One is I'm going to update the events page at nytech.org for this particular event with some information, including the decks for those who would like to share their decks, and some contact information for all the panelists. If you'd like to send an email to me directly, and I can help you to find other resources or point you towards these other folks, my email address is GIFF, the first four letters of my name, my last name, Gifford, gif@nytech.org. So that's probably the fastest way if you need to get in touch with folks. Thank you so much. We're going to do something like this again. I think we were able to not exhaust this topic at all. I appreciate it, and we'll see you at another event. Thanks.